So we come tonight then to a section entitled, as you see it in your book, The Golden City, and then the subtitle, As Seen from the Country of Beulah. Personally, I think this is a badly named title. All right. It's not a description of the Golden City. It is a description of the country of Beulah and the ability to see the celestial city from the country of Beulah. So the title really should be reversed. It's the country of Beulah, parenthesis, from which you can see the celestial city. Okay, so flip it around, and this chapter will be more appropriate. In fact, in the original Pilgrim's Progress, it's simply named the country of Beulah. So I'm not exactly sure where these titles came from, but that's the way I'm going to post it when I post it, when I post the media for this later. So the section begins with these words. Now I saw in my dream, okay, remember the dreamer is dreaming about these events. Bunyan is writing about a dreamer who is having a dream about some men who are walking a path. All right, see it? Now I saw in my dream that by this time, the pilgrims, that is Christian and hopeful, were got over the enchanted ground and entering into the country of Beulah, whose air was very sweet and pleasant. The way lying directly through it, they solaced themselves there for a season. All right, we'll just pause there and catch us up where we're at. You remember that Christian and hopeful had come to the place called Enchanted Ground a few sections back. And you remember the enchanted ground was that place where they kind of fell into a spiritual apathy. That was the picture that Bunyan painted in the allegory of them coming to this place and they wanted desperately to take a nap because it was just, you know, that it was that spiritual apathy kind of thing, all right? And they made it through enchanted ground by Christian suggesting to hopeful, well, why don't you tell me the story of your conversion? Tell me what faithful preached to you so that you were converted. And you remember hopeful gives his testimony and tells of his conversion, what faithful said to him and so forth. And then the two pilgrims, having now gotten through enchanted ground using that technique, come upon ignorance. All right. And over the last 2 Wednesdays, we looked at the re-encounter that Christian and hopeful had with this man whose understanding of the Christian religion was clearly not consistent with that tale of conversion that that hopeful had presented coming from faithful. So Bunyan is painting ignorance, you remember, as sort of a backdrop against hopeful's true conversion, ignorance's false conversion, and his lack of understanding of the true gospel. And you remember I pointed out that Bunyan undoubtedly included that section in order to say, okay, let me tell you what the true gospel really is. I'll put the opposite on ignorance's lips so that you can get a picture of what the truth really is. Okay. So there they are. They have now come, as the writer here says, they've now come out of, gotten over enchanted ground, and they come to a new territory on the path called Beulah land. Okay. Now, I was always under the impression that the word Beulah meant beautiful. I was always under that impression. But that's not what it means. In fact, it's a Hebrew word that means, anybody know? Anybody? No? See, we're all in the same boat here, right? We would all take this word Beulah and think of it as it comes out of the various hymns that you've heard it, right? If you've been in church at all, you've heard these some sweet Beulah land, and there's one that's in the celebration hymnal. I could not find it because it's not in the title, it's in the lyrics, but there's one in which Beulah is mentioned in the midst of it. I couldn't find it. But nonetheless, we're familiar with it. We all sort of think of it meaning some sort of beautiful place, right? Beulah land. In fact, there's been a number of hymns that use that term, actually. I looked it up. I asked an AI agent today to give me a list of well-known hymns that have Beulah in them. It's much faster than using Google, as it turns out. Okay. And so it listed me a bunch of hymns, and there's some relatively recent, one from 1979, actually, that was written with that word in its title. Okay. But the term doesn't mean beautiful. Here's what it means, and you'll be shocked by this. It means married. M-A-R-R-I-E-D, married, as in husband and wife. The term comes out of the reference that you see there just after the word Beulah in the paragraph, Isaiah chapter 62. In Isaiah 62, God is promising Jerusalem that he will save it and make it glorious. Okay? So Isaiah chapter 62 verse 1 reads, "For Zion's sake I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not be quiet, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness, and her salvation as a burning torch." Okay, so God says, I'm going to do this. I am not going to go silent until the righteousness of Jerusalem is known throughout the world. The nations shall see your righteousness. So now he turns and speaks directly to Jerusalem. The nations shall see your righteousness, the kings your glory, and you shall be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will give. You shall be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate, but you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land, Beulah, which is translated in the ESV as married. Beulah. Verse 5, "For as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you." The picture that's being painted here is the picture in Isaiah 62, not Bunyan, Isaiah 62. The picture that's being painted here is the picture of God coming and joining himself to Jerusalem as a bride and bridegroom are joined together. A picture of God, if you will, metaphorically speaking, marrying his people in that place. It's a way of God saying, I want you to understand that when I finally fulfill all of my promises in you, when I finally bring to you the fullness of all that I have promised to you as a people, it's going to be like, and I'm using that word, not in the popular way we use it nowadays, extra adverbially, but I'm using it in that sense of its real meaning. It's going to be like a married couple. Me and you. See, this imagery we recognize, or we should recognize, actually. It comes out of here, but it really portends itself very well in the New Testament. There are a number of places in the New Testament where you get this picture of Jesus as the bridegroom and the church as the bride. A relationship between them that's pictured as husband and wife. I would say, in a sense, it harkens back to exactly what it was that God was doing in Genesis chapter 2 when he brought the woman to the man. He was forming a one flesh union between them. And metaphorically speaking, that's the picture that's being painted between us and God. We will be one with him in this one flesh. Again, that's metaphorical language, but it's the idea of a connection so close, so intimate, so complete, etc., that the counter or the element of it in our day, in our world, is marriage itself. That's the picture. The idea of us having such a close connection to God that it is even more intimate than a husband and wife. As the best example on this side of glory to picture it. That's the imagery that's being painted. So this Beulah land is this land, and your land married, middle of verse 4. You shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married. That phrase, my delight is in her, is another Hebrew word just by itself. It's translated in English. I think it's something to the effect, I want to say Hezbollah, but that's not exactly, it's similar to that, but not exactly that word, okay? But it's like that. It's the idea of a land that is delight, a delight, and then the other word being Beulah at the end of that. Um, when the translators of the Hebrew Old Testament translated it into Greek, which you call the Septuagint, right? The 70, the LXX is sometimes called because it's the 70 who translated the original Torah into Greek. This was well before Christ in the intertestamental period. They took this word married here and they used the idea of, they didn't know exactly what Greek word to use to describe it. So they used a descriptive phrase instead, and they called it a land that is inhabited, not desolate. That was their interpretation of the word. It's like, okay, you won't be desolate anymore because you will actually be an inhabited. Now that makes sense in terms of Jerusalem as a physical geographical place. So we'll use this idea of a place where what used to be forsaken, because it says that earlier, will no longer be forsaken. So there was this idea it was forsaken, but now it's not going to be forsaken anymore. Now, obviously, the forsaken picture that you see earlier in here, the beginning of verse 4, you'll no longer be termed forsaken, is not the people forsook Jerusalem, it's that they forsook God, and thus he forsook them. Okay, so you're no longer going to be forsaken per se, but we're going to come back. So the Greek translators of the Septuagint said, all right, so let's take this word here and put in this idea of something being inhabited, not desolate. And the Greek word that they used is repeated in Matthew 24 and verse 14, which you remember Matthew 24 is, somewhat of a eschatological chapter, right, having to do with the reality of Jerusalem. And the word is used again here in 24:14 when it says, 24:14, yeah, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So it's embedded in that verse, this word, not a desolate place, a living place, a sense in which the gospel is going to go out to the ends of the earth, the whole world, all the nations, sort of thing. The world's no longer to be desolate anymore, that as though God has forsaken it, but now God will be there. That's the picture that's being painted here in this word. So this is what Bunyan picks up. He picks up this idea of a place called Beulah land. Now he's going to use it in this allegory to describe a particular phase, if you will, of the Christian life. Again, Christian and hopeful are walking through various places, and each of these places represents some particular phase or time or reality within the Christian experience, right? So each one of them has something to do with what it means to be a follower of Christ. Sometimes you go through this place, sometimes you go through this place, sometimes you go through this place. The places geographically are representative of certain realities in life as believers. The enchanted ground, as we saw. A place that's, nice and comfortable and so forth. And so the result is that those who come into that place want to take a nap. And Bunyan paints that as a picture of that time in Christian life where sometimes we get apathetic about the faith and we just kind of grow cold in our pieties and so forth. We kind of take a nap, if you will, spiritually speaking. Okay, so Bunyan is painting this Beulah land in this way. He's saying, let me talk to you about another place that we as Christians will come to as a part of our journey. And so I've already read that they heard here, that they solaced themselves here for a season. And he says, here they heard continually the singing of birds and saw flowers appear in the earth. In this country the sun shines night and day, for it is beyond the valley of the shadow of death. And out of reach of giant despair. So in that phrase, what Bunyan's really doing is he's painting this picture of a place that's kind of the opposite of those. The opposite of enchanted ground, the opposite of the valley of shadow of death, the opposite of giant despair. Those places represent those times when we feel far from God. When we have that sense in life due to whatever, guilt, shame, sin, temptation, whatever, those kinds of things. Remember we talked about as we went through those sections, right? Those kinds of things that have a tendency to make us feel as though God is far off and he's no longer approachable and he's no longer there. The valley, the shadow of death, and the place of giant despair. Remember giant despair being that, Christian looking at himself and thinking of how wicked he was and thinking to himself, obviously I'm never going to get to the celestial state. Look what I am. And in fact, the giant despair tried to just say to him, why don't you just kill yourself? Or at least his wife did. So Bunyan is trying to paint here for us, using this word Beulah, a place different than that. Obviously different than that. Clearly different from that. And I think he uses the word Beulah here because he perceives what it is that God is saying when he puts this metaphor of marriage over this promise in Isaiah 62 and beyond. I think Bunyan is trying to say, let me tell you what I think this means. Let me share with you what I think this place is. I suspect that Bunyan himself had actually come to this place at some point. It's hard for us, I think, in 21st century America to grasp exactly the metaphorical reality that's being painted in terms of marriage and this picture. So let me try to explain in this way. When God looked at Adam after he had formed him from the dust of the ground, what did he then say about Adam? He said he was very good, but then he said something else. It's not good that the man should be alone. What's the implication of that? There's something missing. There's something missing. Adam is not complete. Now, Adam as a man standing there with the fullness of the image of God is complete in the sense that he's a full creature and so forth. But God's intentions and purposes for man, Adam in the, but not in the name sense, but in the more generic sense, Adam, there was more than just one man standing there and saying to God, okay, what would you have me do now? There's a sense in which God had a purpose to go beyond that, and that purpose implies that there was to be something more in Adam than just Adam. It is not good for the man to be alone. And so God, as you remember the story, right, forms a woman from the man and brings the woman to the man. In fact, even to the point where Adam calls him woman, her, woman, out of man, as one coming out of man, to complete me, to make me whole, that my purpose might be fulfilled, that all that I am might be accomplished. I mean, I've said to you how many times now? God had given an initial command, a primordial command, be fruitful and multiply and take dominion over all things. And Adam's standing there going, well, I could certainly work on the dominion part, but I'm not really sure how the fruitful part's going to work. I mean, I see how they're doing it, giraffes and elephants and raccoons, but I'm not sure exactly how I'm supposed to do that, right? Even as all the animals are paraded in front of him, correct? So there's a sense that marriage, the creation of woman and brought the woman to the man such that they become one flesh. Remember, that's specifically noted in there. As they become one flesh, they become one new thing out of two, and that becomes the thing by which God accomplishes, or man is supposed to, I should say, accomplish this work of taking dominion over all things. There's a sense of completion there. Now, none of us have any struggle with that, right? I mean, all of what I just said, there's not really much controversy there. But there's one step further we got to go here in order to really understand what it is that Bunyan's pointing to and what it is that God's saying in Isaiah 62. And this is the hard part, okay? Because we live in a fallen world. And because we live in a fallen world, marriage as an ideal is no longer a reality, is it? It's no longer an ideal. You got two sinful human beings trying to form or trying to be one flesh with one another, and it doesn't always work out very well. But the original picture of marriage was designed not only for Adam to be completed in having Eve brought to her, but to be full of comfort and joy and what's the other word I'm looking for? A sense of me being, us being everything. The one idea, but a sense of, I have this in my wife, I have this sense of being total, of being all that I'm supposed to be. That's the picture that's being painted in God coming to Jerusalem and say, you and I, up until now, have had a somewhat tempestuous relationship. But when my promises are fulfilled, I'm going to come to you and we are going to have a connection and a relationship that is going to be so perfect between us that there will be utter bliss between us. See that? It's kind of hard to get in this fallen world, isn't it? Because there's probably some of you who don't want to make eye contact right about now, but you're saying something to the effect of bliss? Okay? And I'm not trying to make fun of anybody's marriage at all, but we're all honest. If we're all honest, it's like, okay, that doesn't really always rise to the top of our thinking when it comes to the relationship we have with our spouse. Oh yes, when I'm around my husband, I'm filled with bliss. When I'm around my wife, I'm filled with bliss. Okay? But that was the original intention. And that's the picture that's being painted here in Isaiah 62. And thus, I think what Bunyan is picking up on, he's picking up on this idea that as we as Christians walk this road, there will certainly be times when we will struggle in our relationship with God. We will struggle because of our own shame and guilt and so forth in these other places that I've mentioned. But there will also, should be times when our salvation in Christ brings us great bliss in our relationship with God. Such a sense of overwhelming joy in Him that it's almost like nothing else exists. You know, that kind of, I don't know, some of you who may be younger, who may have younger marriages may remember this. I remember it, but remember those days when you were with your spouse and you just couldn't get enough of each other and you were always there and there was always an excitement that you couldn't wait to be with them. And now maybe for most of us men it's before we got married, but you know. Just kidding, just kidding. Hey, we succeeded. But you remember those days, right? That's kind of the idea. Now, I realize in a fallen world, these things have a tendency to get messed up, right? It would be nice if we could always have that kind of thing. And you're supposed to work at it to try to see that. But imagine a marriage relationship where there is no sinful selfishness between the two parties, where the relationship is that pure sense of oneness with one another, that one flesh union that's not in any way separated. Try to imagine that. I think what Bunyan is saying is we can have that same thing, or we should be looking for that same thing with God. He's saying Christian and hopeful have come to that place here. And you will notice, by the way, that it's right near the end of the journey, okay, because the next section is going to be the river of death, all right? So this is right near the end of this journey. And so I think what Bunyan is intimating is that as we walk this Christian life, the reality is that we should, I would think, as we grow up in the faith, as we become more and more sanctified, as we become less and less sinful, more and more holiness, as we're striving more and more to reach the celestial city, that place of God, before we close our eyes in death, that we might actually come to this place where we have this sense of great bliss with God. I read one commentator on this because I struggled. I will admit I struggled with this section. I wasn't really sure how to understand what was being said here. But I read a commentator on this, and he said, you know, the Puritans had this morbid obsession with ending their lives well and making sure that they were completely prepared as they came to the days in which they were about to die. They very specifically purposed to fill their lives with the kinds of things that people would say, all right, he's finishing well. He's focused on the Lord, and he's in that place where all his life is about God at this point. All his life is about Christ at this point. They were obsessed with that. If you go read Richard Baxter and some of the other Puritans, Richard Baxter, the only one that comes to mind at the moment, but there were several other names on the list that in their biographies you see this, of people writing about the things that we're doing at the end of their lives. Bunyan is writing from that perspective. Now, we don't do that so much in our day, right? We're not all that concerned about preparing ourselves to die. In fact, I think in many ways we've reversed that in modernity, where we are actually not preparing ourselves to die. We're trying to live as long as we can. So we kind of, in a sense, have flipped that over. Oh, yeah, we buy insurance policies, but we don't really think we're ever going to use them, okay? The fact is that we're not that obsessed about that. So I think Bunyan is writing this from that perspective. What should the end of the Christian life really look like? What should be the end? When Paul says, I want to finish the race well, the Puritans, I should say, took that seriously. What would that mean as we come to the end of our lives, as we're thinking at the end of our lives, okay, what is it about Christ, and what does it mean to trust in him and walk by faith and live out that? What would I want my last words to be? What would I want my last thoughts to be as I leave this world and go into the next? Now, obviously, we're going to discuss this next week when we get into the river of death, but the fact is not all of us necessarily are going to have such a specific opportunity to do that per se. But nonetheless, that's where he's going here. See it? It's kind of strange to our ears, isn't it, in the 21st century? That's why I struggled with the chapter. I'm like, what is it trying to get at here? What is it he's talking about? He's talking about a Beulah land, a place where we are metaphorically, in a sense, see ourselves as married to our God in a blissful, wedded state. Nothing between us. And that sense of perfect one fleshness coming together with us. Now, there's a good amount of debate whether it's even possible for that to be, right, in this life. But Bunyan seems to think that this should be the sort of thing that becomes normative, or at least possible, in the life of the Christian. So the text goes on to say, here they were within sight of the city, okay, the celestial city. Remember, as I said, the title says that you can see the city from here. So they could see the city they were going to. And also here met them some of the inhabitants thereof. All right, so there were certain inhabitants of this land that occupied this place. For in this land the shining ones commonly walked, because it was on the borders of heaven. All right, now you remember that shining ones reference takes us back to several other places. When Christian was at the cross, he was ministered to there by shining ones. We saw it again with Flatterer, who spoke, or there was a reference to shining ones in that section. So this is probably Bunyan's picture of spiritual beings, angels, ministering angels who are there to sort of minister to you in these days as you're seeing the celestial city, as you're drawing close to the end of life. And it says because it's on the borders of heaven. That would be my interpretation of the shining ones from his perspective. In this place, they met with abundance of what they had sought for in all the pilgrimage. Now, think about that line. They've been seeking for something all the way along, the pilgrimage. Even in all the various other places they had gone to, they had been seeking for this place where they come near to the place that they're trying to get to. Okay, so the Christian walking through life is trying to get somewhere. Where are we trying to get? We're trying to get into the presence of God. We're trying to get into the very presence of the Holy One. Well, at least I hope so. And so we have this desire to get there. Well, here they are. Here they heard voices from out of the city, loud voices saying, Say ye to the daughter of Zion, Behold, thy salvation cometh. Behold, his reward is with him. Notice the reference to Isaiah 62 that I read to you earlier. Here all the inhabitants of the country called them the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord. The people in this place had a focus on that end goal of being in perfect relationship with God. And you notice he references again Isaiah 62. Now, as they walked in this land, they had more rejoicing than in parts more remote from the kingdom to which they were bound. There's this more rejoicing here. There's more joy in this place. There's a greater sense of fulfillment and happiness and completeness and what other synonyms you want to use to describe this place where I am utterly thrilled with God. And drawing near to the city, they had a more perfect view thereof. So now they could see the city from here. Okay, so this is where you get the imagery that Bunyan is painting here about this land. This is a place where you can see the celestial city. You're not there yet, but man, we can see it from here. We have walked this journey. We have completed this journey. We have gotten to this place where now, there it is in front of us. We've actually made it to a place we can see the celestial city. We have made it through the land of giant despair. We have made it through the enchanted ground. We have made it through the valley of the shadow of death and all the other places and diversions and problems and issues and difficulties and pains and sufferings and tribulations that they have gone through all the way along. We're here. We're actually here. We can see the city from here. And he begins to describe it. It was built of pearls and precious stones. Also the street thereof was paved with gold. Sound familiar? By reason of the natural glory of the city. Now, catch this. By reason of the natural glory of the city and the reflection of the sunbeams upon it, Christian, with desire, fell sick. And hopeful also had a fit or two of the same disease. They literally become overwhelmed by the beauty of what they see. The sickness, you'll notice it says, with desire. The sickness is this sense of, oh, it's so close I can touch it. I want to be there. I'm desperate to be there. There it is. It's right in front of me. It's almost as though, no, it's not almost as though. It's actually though, Bunyan is saying, shouldn't this be the heart cry of every believer? I want to be there in the presence of Christ. You know, the Apostle Paul asked that question a couple times, didn't he? He dealt with that reality. You know, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And sometimes I'd rather go there and be there than be here. But I know he has to work for me here, so I'll stay here and do the work. But the idea is that there's a place there, and we know about it. And the imagery of a place that's made out of pearls and paved with gold is this picture of something magnificent and beautiful. And the imagery is not being painted to paint like, okay, there's the castle and that's the one I'm going to get over there on 3rd Street. It's really more a matter of that's where Christ is. That's the place of glory. That's the sunbeams that are falling out of it. It's the place of glory. And I want that glory. I want to be in a place of glory. So they fell sick with it. And Hopeful also had a fit or two of the same disease. Wherefore here they lay by it a while, crying out. A quote from Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 5. If you see my beloved, tell him that I am sick with love. Might be an entirely different interpretation of the book of Song of Solomon if you read it now through that lens. The one that I am going to be with, I can't stand not to be with her anymore. I want to be with this one that I am to marry, right? That's the imagery. That's really what marriage ought to look like, really. Where we're like, I can't wait to be with her. She can't wait to be with me. And that's the picture that we have with Christ as our bridegroom. Can't wait to be with him. Can't wait to be one with him for all eternity. So there's this sickness in them of this, I'm just not there yet. But boy, I can't wait to get there. Then they walked nearer and nearer through the orchards, vineyards, and gardens whose gates open into the highway. They saw the gardener who told them that the gardens and vineyards were planted for the king's delight and for the solemn solace of pilgrims. This is a place you have come to where you get a taste of glory divine, but you're not quite there yet. Now, in the original of this section, I'm not done reading it, but in the original of this section, there's a character called Temporary who Christian and Hopeful encounter. And it's unfortunate that they took that little bit out of this abridged version. But you could tell even by the name that where Bunyan's going with the character. Before they're introduced to Beulah land, they run across this guy by the name of Temporary, and his view, his focus is all on the temporal things of this world. It's all on things in this life, okay? And then comes Beulah land, and the obvious implication is that this is a place where the focus of the Christian, the one who's following after Christ, is such that it's like, okay, all that stuff is great, but I want him. Okay, thank you for all these wonderful things you've given us, O Lord. Thank you for all these blessings that we have. Thank you for all these temporal things that we enjoy. And thank you for their beauty, and thank you for their whatever. Thank you for all the good in them. But you know what? I'll trade all of them for him. That's the idea. That's the picture here. If I had to run an application of this paragraph, of this chapter to us today, I would say, what Bunyan is trying to point out is that we should be the kind of people who are so focused on Christ that the things of earth grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. That our lives are so fixated upon him, just like a lover running to his lover. I want him. I want him. See? It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? It really is an interesting picture. So as they walk through this place, they're walking through this time in which they are close to that time when they will be able to actually go to be with Christ. But as I said, okay, reading on, but as I said, the reflection of the sun upon the city, for the city was pure gold, was so extremely glorious that they could not, as yet, with open face behold it, but through an instrument made for that purpose. So they couldn't look directly on it. Now, the imagery that you see painted there in the allegory is the same kind of imagery. Let me use this as an illustration. You ever seen a solar eclipse? Okay. You can't look directly at it, can you? Because it'll blind you if you do. Even if it's fully occluded by the moon, you can't look at the sun. You have to look through an instrument of some sort. I remember back when I was a kid, there was a full solar eclipse that came through Minneapolis, and I stood on the roof of the company I was working for, 6-story building up off the ground, perfect, nothing in the way, and wore a welder's mask. You know, the darkest one that the arc welders use, and looked at the sun through it. It was glorious. But I needed something to look through. That's the idea here. Or as Paul says, we look through a glass, we see through a mirror dimly. We can't look directly upon the glory of Christ. We can't see his glory directly. It's been muted from us. So we need an instrument to look through. And I'm going to go first to the 2 Corinthians reference here. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18. Let me go back to verse 14. But their minds were hardened. To this day, when they read the old covenant, that's the Jews, the same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. So they have a veil over their face. They can't really see God because they're veiled by virtue of their sinfulness. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. The instrument that's being used to help us to see the Lord is the Spirit of God, who's telling us of him, speaking of him. And of course, the Word being the primary instrument through which this is coming. We are seeing him with unveiled face. We are being transformed more and more into the image of Christ by virtue of our sanctification, as the Word of God is used over us by the power of the Spirit of God to remove that old fleshly nature and transform it more and more into holiness. We get to see Christ more and more. Why? Because we literally become like him more and more. We see him more. Until that day when he raises us from the dead, and then we're really going to see him. He also also references Revelation 21, verse 18. And this is a picture of the verse 18, a picture of the New Jerusalem coming down, and the dimensions of it, and so forth. And then in verse 22, it says, I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, the Lamb, and the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. God himself becomes the light of this place that we dwell in our state. And so what he's saying is there's a time, or there should be a time, I think, in the Christian life, where walking the walk and being transformed by the work of the Spirit of God, and we come more and more to this place of wanting to be with him. We see more and more of that glory of him as we see it even in ourselves, as we are being transformed, and we look and we're told about what it is that God has promised us, that he is going to come to us, and Christ is going to be our bridegroom, and we are going to be his bride, and we're going to be with him in that intimate relationship beyond anything pictured, even in marriage in this world, and that's what we want. So it's sort of as though Bunyan is saying, we should want this. It's what we should be tracking for. It's what we should be pursuing at. When Christ means more to you than anything else. And the picture of marriage that's painted in the Bible is a picture that is a picture not just of completeness, but of utter bliss, of utter satisfaction, of a sense of completeness. That should be what we want in Christ. And so I saw that as they went on, there met them 2 men in raiment shone like gold. Also their faces shone as the light. Undoubtedly some of the shining ones from earlier who met them. And they will be important in the next section. So Bunyan, I think, is picking up a Puritan thought about what it means to finish the Christian life well, as would have been understood in that day. But I think we can take that, and while we may not live in a Puritan age, we can certainly say, he's right. Our joy, our desire should be him above all things. His glory, to see his face, unbridled, unveiled, to look into his face. Because I'm convinced of this. That moment that we do see him, what we will see from his face is a love so great we can't possibly fathom it. It's like no love that your spouse has ever shown you. As much as you may see it in your spouse's face, and I do regularly, it will be infinitely greater when we look into his, as he looks at us with that face that took our sin and then brought us to himself. Now that's a day I can't wait to see. Don't talk to me about pearly gates and streets of gold, mansions, and long-lost relatives, and old hunting dogs. All of these things which I've heard in sermons, by the way. This is what's going to be waiting for you in heaven. What I'm waiting for is to see him face to face. When my eyes close in death, that's what I want to see. I want to see that love, and I know it will be waiting. It is waiting. And I've already seen hints of it in Beulah land here. But imagine what it'll be like face to face. That is our setup for the next section called the River of Death.